I know we've got a... Did I ask you guys to watch the rest of the videos last week? Do you remember?
Yes, you did.
I did? And you didn't?
No.
Thanks for being honest for everybody else's sake. Yeah, see if they match up. Yeah. All right. Dad, would you lead us in prayer?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that we can come here this evening and we can learn more about you and that we can share the fellowship that we have together under leadership from your Holy Spirit, Lord, and we thank you for that. We just ask now that as we leave this evening that we may remember what we've learned and we may be able to apply it to our hearts and to those that are around us. We thank you, Lord, for all these many blessings. In your name we pray.
Amen. All right. I want to spend some time. I'm planning on meeting one more week. Okay, so one more week. I was hoping to just do it for 4 weeks. We'll do one more week, and then we'll break up into small groups. I want to make sure that we get all the material covered as we go along, as far as that goes. So, in our book, in your books with the definitions, I know we went through 11 last week, Unit 11. So we've been through observation, we've been through interpretation, okay, and now we're working through, this is the last section, it'll be application, okay, application. Application, if you do observation well, and interpretation becomes much easier, okay. Interpretation sometimes is what makes you nervous because we want to make sure we get it right, and so that sometimes is the things that makes us the most nervous. At least I should say that it ought to be what makes you the most nervous. Let me put it that way, because we don't want to mishandle God's word. But we always also, with that, remember that we are not infallible, meaning that we are human beings. We're not the Holy Spirit, and we are not, and whatever you write in your book is not Scripture, okay? So it doesn't mean it's not important, but, sometimes people get really knotted up about that. Because what can happen is when you start to share your thoughts and you start to share interpretation and even your application, you can get worried that, well, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? Every week I wrestle with that, okay? And at the end of the day, we're all dependent upon the Spirit that He carries that which is true through, okay? And He also then helps to reveal and guard against error. Does that make sense? So all of us are dependent in relation to that. So again, the more you observe, the more enjoyable Bible study should be, the easier interpretation becomes, okay? And then application, for me at least, becomes pretty self-evident, okay? In other words, it's almost like you kind of like go, duh, because it's like, but it can also be difficult when you start thinking about, exactly what's going on. So if you've got your books, Unit 12, did I give you the Unit 12? Okay. So on Unit 12, you've got application. How does it work? And those 4 things you've got there are know, relate, meditate, and practice, right? So application is always based on your interpretation. So there's one interpretation in relation to the Word, and then it relates to like, where am I at in life? Home, marriage, work. That's why it's always applicable to you, because everybody in here is in different life stance, different life circumstance. And that's where small groups for me become so incredibly important. It becomes being incredibly important because it should be an outlet for you to be able to share life with others in an intimate way that you cannot do in any other way. I think we said this the first week or whatever. Why do small D groups of 3 to 5, instead of Sunday school? And the answer to that is D groups are designed for you to be able to be intimate in a way that you cannot be even in Sunday school. I mean, it's meant to be real even in a way that you can't be in Sunday school. Now, you would like for church to be get that way in Sunday school, don't get me wrong. But the reality is, if we get down to it, we have a hard time being honest with one person, much less 10, 12, 15 in terms of a room. And even your, come on, Johnny, we're waiting for you. And even in your, it's incredibly difficult. But that's why, as far as D groups go, when the 4 or 5 come together, there's a commitment there to those 4 or 5, and those 4 or 5 stay together for the entire year. There's not people that float in, there's not people that float out. Because there's reasoning behind that is the desire is for there to be accountability in a way in which you can be open and transparent with what's going on in your life. If the groups don't get to that point, they're very limited in their effectiveness. Okay? And that's why what we share in a small group stays in that small group. It doesn't go home. It's not that you don't love your wife and your husband, but just the reality is those things are meant to stay in that group for those individuals to work through together as they move forward. Okay. Well, that's where now application comes in. Because now as we're going through the Word, there's going to be different passages that strike you. There's going to be the interpretation of what does that mean? What does that mean then now? How does that then affect my life personally in relation to where I'm at? My marriage is about to get broken up. I don't know if we're going to make it. Okay? Work is going unbelievable, hard, crazy, chaotic. I'm at the latter stages of my life, and I'm facing these fears that are moving forward. Right? All of those different things. Well, everybody in that, everyone in this room right here is in a different place as it relates to all that stuff. So your application is not meant to be uniformed. It's meant to be personalized for you, okay, as far as where you're at. And then, then you have meditate, and then practice involves relating the truth of God to living in a fallen world. I want to us walk through 13, 14, and 15 for time's sake, because I said last week I want to make sure that we get through our definitions. But I also want to maybe do an exercise. So application involves asking the right questions, okay? You've got this so that whenever you're doing application, as you get started off, if you need to, you can use these 4 questions to help prod you with your application. So if you struggle with application, okay, then this is what you can do. So the first blank is application. That's asking the right questions. Number 1, is there an example to follow? Okay. 2, is there a sin to avoid? Is there a promise to claim? A prayer to repeat? Everybody know what I mean with prayer to repeat? If you have a passage and that individual is praying to God and your heart aligns with their heart in relation to where they are, what are they praying? Part of the reason Psalms are given to us is it's David's raw, open honesty and prayer before God, right? And you actually see through David's Psalms and his prayer is that oftentimes he is saying, man, God, this place where you have me right now really, really stinks. I can't believe it. And as you watch that prayer go through, it shifts to, I know that you're a great God. I know that you carry all things. I know that. Oftentimes it shifts to where I'm at, to God's greatness of character and nature, all of a sudden then that you get to the end of the prayer or the end of the psalm, and guess what you find David doing? So I can trust in you. Yeah. So sometimes we see that with a prayer to repeat. 5, is there a command to obey? Okay. Anytime you're reading scriptures, if you have imperatives meaning a command, it's not a suggestion, but it's a do this, do that. You can mark that, highlight it, show it. It's an easy way to see, hey, this is a no-brainer. Is there a condition to meet? Okay. In Scripture, what you find is God's economy in play. It's like gravity. So with God, He put gravity in place. So I can't go out to I-30, sit in the middle, set up a tent in the middle of I-30 and say, well, God's going to take care of me. No, He's put an economy in play in that, right? So whenever you get run over and I visit you in the hospital, I'm going to say, you dummy, what are you doing putting a tent in I-30, right? Gravity, God designed gravity so that if you jump off the building, you're going to fall, right? So there's certain principles that God put in place. And when He gives us these principles, it's like it's a condition that this is normatively what happens. So Proverbs comes in here. Proverbs in their wisdom is different. Most of the time in Proverbs, it's different from a promise. Sometimes people will take a proverb and they'll take it and they'll claim it as a promise. The problem is not all Proverbs, most of the Proverbs aren't a promise. Okay? They're a principle. Which means if you practice this, this is the normative outcome of that, right? Doesn't mean that there are not exceptions to it, right? So 7, is there a verse to memorize? 8, is there a challenge to follow? Okay. Unit 14, application. He does a Ezra 7:10 exercise. I'm going to do something just a little bit different. Number 1 is seek. Stresses knowledge, preparation. 2 is do. Put into practice what you know to be right. 3 is teach. So if you want to review Ezra 7:10, and again, you can go on YouTube, just type in Dallas Theological Seminary, Howard Hendricks, and you have these 15 videos that you can go through if you want as well. Okay. So, application is the engagement of that which you've seen and now understood, right? It's always meant to how does this now impact my life in relation to this day? Yeah. Any questions on application? Is it easy or hard? Some folks find it hard. Is it easy or hard? Find it hard, David? You do, Dave? Yeah. Why is that, you think? Or what is it that makes it feel hard? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Anybody else have a hard time with the application sometimes? Out of the 3 steps, which is the hardest? Observation? Yeah. Yeah, it's almost universal. When you go through this, it's almost universal. It's so difficult just to slow down and observe, because we love to get going on it. Let's go. Giddy up and let's go, you know. That's why it's interesting. This morning's passage is one you could use for that, because the whole passage of Psalm 110 is messianic, right? But they didn't observe well on verse 1. And therefore they missed who the entire chapter was pointing to. Stop and think about that. So if you want to do like a lesson, the importance of observation, do today's passage, Matthew 22:40, and say, did they believe, common belief, that that's a messianic psalm? Yeah, absolutely they did. Did they believe that David is the one who wrote it through the inspiration of the Spirit? Yes, they did. So did they believe it as authoritative? Yes, they do. Right? So what happened with them? They missed the observation that if David is saying that, how is it that he says, the Lord said of my Lord? And really wrestle with that. Yeah. So it's an easy thing to do, for sure. All right, and then Unit 15 is the implementing. Implementing is the first word there. Implementing. Personal Bible study. Where do we go from here? One is to establish a regular Bible study program. Objective determines the outcome, which is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. 2, make a personal plan. So the blank there is personal plan. That includes both Bible study and prayer. A is Bible study, and then B is prayer. Within the Desire 3 of what we're doing here, form a Bible study group for accountability. On 3, it's accountability. 3 of the Unit 15, 3. You see what I'm talking about? Can you show her, Jen? Jen's got it, I think. Yeah. And then A, what are the strengths? Examining the process. A is what are the strengths? B, what are the weaknesses? And C, what needs to change? Okay. So when we, before you leave, you've got cards, okay? If you are, we want you to commit to the process, okay? So for week 1, we said the issue of discipleship is not how much Bible you know. It's not how well you are even able to observe, interpret, and apply. It's not even how good a shape that you're necessarily in, right? So you look at the 12 disciples that Jesus called, they're continually in the learning pattern, okay? But the one thing that he required of them was to commit. You see commitment, 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 right? So there's a point in which you say, are you committed in relation to this, okay? So I want to go through one lesson together, because I don't want you guys to freak out about, my gosh, all this is going to take me 3 hours every day. So I want to go through one lesson together, all right? And then before you leave, write down your name, and if you know that you are in, I'm in, yes. If you know that you're out, no. And if you are on the fence, put a maybe, okay? So if you know that you're in, yes. If you know that you're out, no. If you don't know yet, maybe, okay? And then on the back of it, put times or days that you know just won't work, okay? So like, Jen works Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. None of those times going to work, right? So if you've got times that you just know these times are not going to work, on the back say, will not work, okay? And just put those days, times. And then if you've got other times that are better or will work, let me know that. Because as I look at this, I've got to kind of see how all that fleshes out, pairs out, because this next week I'm going to be praying about starting to look at how groups may form and fit together and everything else. Because we won't actually start until after next week. Okay, the reading plan doesn't actually start till next week, but we're gonna do as a group our own reading plan this week. Okay. So this week, what we're going to do is we're just going to take 4 days. Okay. So 4 days this week. Each day, one chapter in Ruth. Okay. Each day, one chapter in Ruth. Only 4 chapters in Ruth. Each day, one chapter in Ruth. Only 3 days of though journaling. Okay. So we're going to make it fairly simple this week. 4 days of reading. We'd like for you guys to go ahead and do just 3 journals, okay? Which is all you're doing in your journal is you're going to read that chapter. You're going to find maybe some verses that stand out to you. Observe what those verses say. And then interpretation and then application, okay? Everybody on the same page with that? Question? Mike, do you have a question? I was walking back tonight. I'm off today. I'm not reading people well. Usually I can read people. It's like, oh, Mike's got a question. Mike, what you got? You know. So I was. What? Obviously not. So I was walking back to my seat this morning, and Ross was sitting there, and I swear he looked like he had, was going to say something to me. And so I shook his hand, and then he looked like he was going to say something to me. So I bent over, and he kind of leaned up, and we just kind of looked at each other, and he said, "Were you going to ask me something?" I said, "I guess not." It got awkward there for a second. Yeah, it got awkward there for a second. Okay. This is a process that is not just inherently natural. Okay, but the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. Okay. So I keep saying this, but don't be intimidated by it. I hope next week, I didn't get it done this week, but I hope next week to even give some examples. Me and Johnny were actually talking about that for you to sort of see. But in the meantime, I want to go through a passage first. Okay, so let's do 1 Samuel 1. Okay, now here's what we're going to do. We are only going to take 30 minutes. May not even take 30 minutes. Okay, only 30 minutes. Okay, and here's all I want you to do. Okay, I just want you, I committed the cardinal sin. I gave you the passage before. I told you what we wanted to do. So what I want you to do is, I want you just simply to read 1 Samuel 1. Okay? If you want to read it a couple of times, that's fine. All right? You've got a verse, 2 verses, maximum maybe for this exercise, 3 verses. And if they stick out to you, just do a little highlight, do a little notation, or whatever the case may be. All right? Then when you go back, all right, after you've read the whole chapter, observe. You can observe the chapter, but especially observe those 2 or 3 verses. Okay? Anything that you see in those 2 or 3 verses. Things that you don't think even necessarily matter. Okay? And you can bullet point them. You don't have to do full sentences if you don't want. You can just absolutely bullet point them. All right? For now, don't do more than what your observation right here allows for. So just fill up that spot there of observation, because I promise you, in fact, I had folks come to me after last week and say, I need more pages. I'm gonna have 3 pages of observations, okay? But we're not doing like what we did last week. It's 2 or 3 verses, observe, 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 and just write down your observations, okay? All right? Then from that, we move over to interpretation. So when you're going through the observation process, you're going through those questions. What do you see? Right? Who's involved? What time of day? Where are they at? What just happened? What didn't happen? What's the emotion that's involved in this particular thing that's going on? What repeats? Right? Who are the characters involved? Right? All of that kind of stuff. And then when you move over to interpretation, you're going to then kick that in on interpretation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 15, maybe 20 minutes, okay, just to read chapter 1 and write down observations, okay? So we'll take 15 minutes. Just look, read, a couple of verses stick out to you, and then what you're going to do is take your journal, write down what you read. So that's going to be obviously 1 Samuel 1. Date is today's date. Verses of reflection, that's totally on you. Any verses that you guys see that stick out, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be, if it's me, more, but that's joke's on me, okay? All right? If you need to reference, what was interpretation? Go back into your book, a few pages to the left, look at interpretation, remind you of a few things to help you with interpretation, and then put your interpretation, okay? Now, I am not going to require anybody to share anything from their journals, okay? All right? So don't freak out, because I'm not going to call on anybody here to have to involuntarily tell me what you wrote, okay? I'm not saying, I'm not going to say, does anybody want to share? But if you want to share, that's fine. But I don't want you to feel any pressure like anybody else is going to read anything that you wrote, okay? All right? Ready, set, go. going to give you a couple more minutes on the observation side of it. And then I'll want to step into interpretation. All right. So now flip over to your left of your books and let's just rehash unit number 9. Okay. Just as a reminder, let's look over unit number 9. You don't have outside consultation, so I'm going to help you just a little bit in terms of just thinking through interpretation. We don't expect everybody to definitely get it right first go round. With interpretation, you're looking at these 5 things, okay? Content. Most of you guys probably have already got this down on Unit 9. Content, what was examined through the process of observation. Context, what goes in front of it and what follows it. Okay, now if you got a few verses here, okay, that you pulled out, then you're sort of looking at, okay, what happened a little bit ahead of those verses? What happened behind those verses, right? So let's say some of the verses that you observed in relation to Hannah was in the midst of her deep grief in relation to that, okay? What happened at the first before that? What happened at the end, okay, of the chapter? Okay. If you were looking at this as a whole, because you also want to look at it as a whole, right? Samuel. Do we know what Samuel? We'll give you books with these resources, just of the book backgrounds, right? But Samuel is going to get into what era of Israel? Do you know? What? So it's the end of the Judges, and going to go into what? Into the Kings. Okay? So just in terms of just a little bit of reference for that. Now, there's not anything in relation to that we're going to write down per se in interpretation. But it's sort of good to know, where does this book fit in light of the whole? Where are we at in relation to the story? Okay? Because here's what you're going to find. If we were doing it, it'd be tons of fun. But if we were doing it, you'd find how this fit into the book as a whole in like a whole new way, right? Where's Israel at in relation to this? That's context. We don't know fully where they are right now, right? But if you know, if and we will have, if you've went through the Judges, let's just take a guess. If we've gone through the Judges, do we think Israel's on the rise or on the fall? It's always a pretty good guess to say on the fall, right? Okay, yeah. So now all of a sudden you've got this guy who has this wife and who's all these things that's happening, right? But Israel sort of has been in this decline, right? How does that fit in? Right now, we're going to end that with a question mark, right? We're going to end that with a question mark. But what's sort of the scene? What's sort of the setting? So, if you marked off a few verses, was was this before her husband talked to her? Was this after? Was this during? Was this after? Was this before? Was this during? Was this after? 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 Was this during? Was this How did she respond after he talked to her? Was she with the priest or was she with the husband? What happened in relation to that? That's all just that context, right? So as you observe that in context, right, what goes on before, what goes on after, right, then comparison, right? Sometimes this can involve good concordance, but Old Testament comparison often just comes in relation to the context. There's a little bit of a flow here that goes with, if anybody had to guess sort of the one of the major things that you read out of this passage that kind of just jumps out at you as far as an emotion goes, what would you say? Anybody having guesses? Just the emotion that comes out of this. Is this a happy chapter? Do what? Yeah. Okay. So it's like hard to miss that, you know. So that, again, that's within that context in relation to that. All right. Culture. Sometimes you need outside resources to help that, right? But here's what they're thinking in relation to that. In this particular culture with Israel, right? If you're an American culture and you've got 2 wives, is that strange? Yeah, it's still a little bit strange with Israel. But is that strange? It's massively strange. Well, but with Israel, we know that this is something that went on in relation to Israel, right? Do we ever have in Israel's history where we have 2 women who were fighting? Right? Yeah, you know. So again, if that's in your, it doesn't have to be in your wheelhouse, but if that's in your wheelhouse, you sort of like, oh, okay. What's a priest's role in relation to Israel? What's a husband's role in relation to Israel? What's a husband's role in relation to the home? Right? All those things. And most of you have more background in that than what you realize, right? Okay. But that helps to aid you in some of the flow of what's going on, because culturally, in this particular passage especially, you've got a lot culturally that's going on right here, right? You got you've got a man who's got 2 wives. You got him going to make peace offerings. You've got him confronting her, right? You've got then them partaking of that sacrifice, and then you've got all of a sudden her showing up to the priest, right? And so you have the priest's interaction with her. The priest then responds after she responds to the priest. And then all of a sudden you've got her coming away with that, with a disposition. And then after that you've got then you had a dedication of a child, and then you've got the giving of a child, right? All of that sort of bears into culturally, okay? So now, after you've observed that, take just whatever passages you've got and interpret. What does it mean? So what does that mean? Okay? Right now, don't worry if you're like, I really don't know. It's okay. All right? You can even write what you think it means with a question mark. Okay? So as you're working through this process, part of the discipleship growth is learn how to interpret. So it's okay if you don't necessarily know, but you say, seems to me like she's da-da-da-da-da. Seems to me like da-da-da-da in these particular verses, okay? So I'm only going to give you like 4 minutes to write down interpretation. Okay. Everybody somewhat good with that? Now, so application, right next to application, I want you to write, so what? And I just want you to simply think, you can ask those questions if you want, but in this particular case, what difference does that make to me? What difference does that make to me? What you just observed and interpreted, what difference does that make to me? I'm just going to give you 2 minutes. Don't want you to overthink it. Good? All right, rate yourself 1 to 10. What do you think? 1 to 10. -3. -3. Hard? Do a hard rating.
Just not enough time.
Just not enough time? Okay. Yeah. All right.
I mean, because you have us do someone's observation, we spent half the time just observing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions I got that I can't answer.
Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. You're what?
I think I'm over-observing. I think I don't know how to do
You will never, ever, ever get me to say that you're over-observing, but yeah, well, that's because it's the first time you brushed your teeth. Was it hard? You don't even remember. So, are you right-handed or left-handed?
Right.
Okay, this week you do it with your left hand. No, I'm serious. Do it with your left hand. How hard will it be? It'll be incredibly difficult. But over time, you know what will happen? You will become good at it. I messed up my right arm and realized that I used my right arm an awful lot. And for about a few weeks, I never thought I was going to be able to, get through. How am I going to brush my teeth with, I can't use my right arm because I had to use my left arm. But you know what? By the time that 8 weeks was over with, I could brush my teeth with my left hand. Bible study is the same way. So it's not just a one-time grab it and catch it and go with it. Okay? So don't feel bad about it. It's like, I don't feel like this is whatever. Okay? How many found it hard, difficult? Yeah, still? Yeah. The other part of it is you're used to sort of your own setting. A lot of, even like Johnny's done it. Johnny, Roger, and David, we've all been doing it. I know, you guys have done it and whatnot in the past. And it's like, but you're used to your own setting. You're used to your own place. You're used to all of that, right? So this is one of the this is one of the more difficult circumstances that you would ever be in, because you're not also going to be in a group whenever you're doing it. Now you have somebody stopping you whenever you do it, right? Yep. Give me some feedback on how you felt yet. Did anybody get it all completed?
Well, I did, but I'm waiting to see if I did it right.
Well, I said you didn't have to share yours, but do you want to share yours?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Someone else.
So somebody want to share what they've got? Anybody? Anybody brave enough to share?
I got the bare bones.
Oh, good. Great. No, give it to us. That's great. That's good.
So, we've studied this before. I remember the story of Hannah and Samuel, and this is what happens to me every time I read through here and I see something and I go, yeah, I read that last time, but I didn't really put my stock in it. What does that mean? So when she's there with Eli at the temple in verse 11 is what I wrote on it.
So you wrote on verse 11? All right. So your verse of reflection of verse 11.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
So and really just kind of the second half. She made a vow and said, "Oh Lord, I hope that you will indeed look upon the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, that I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor will never come upon his head." And I thought all that makes sense, except why would she not let a razor come upon his head?
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered Samson was the same way.
Mm-hmm.
There was something about that. So I looked at my little concordance here and flipped back over to number 6:5, and it talks about the Nazirite vow.
Yeah.
And there's 3 steps in the Nazirite vow, so I learned that while I was sitting here.
Yeah.
He won't have strong drink, no haircut, and don't go near a dead person.
Okay.
Don't touch a dead body.
Yeah.
So my interpretation of that was that if you're dedicating yourself to the Lord, there's some steps to that, And I said, and it's my bare bones. If you're going to dedicate yourself to the Lord, remain clean. Do the best within our ability to be acceptable according to His standards, not necessarily ours.
Yeah. Good. Anybody gonna flunk him? No. Okay. All right.
I feed on 2 wives.
Okay.
These are just things that I feed on. The 2 wives, yearly worship. When he sacrificed, he gave portions, but unto Hannah he gave more because he loved her more. But yet, she was barren and had no man-child for him. And she was grieved, and that grief brought her to the point where she wasn't eating or drinking, so she gave it to God. And what she gave to God came from a pure and faithful heart. And it also came with a promise. What she prayed came with a promise back to him.
Okay.
If you do this for me, then I will dedicate him to you for as long as he lives.
Okay.
And that's just basic summation or an observation.
Yeah, of observations. Yeah. Of the chapter as a whole.
As a whole.
Yeah. So then, did you get to interpretation?
I have a couple of things that I know that aren't really true interpretations, but the one thing that I wrote that I know that isn't an interpretation is God is sovereign, and He doesn't have to answer you, but yet with a faithful heart in the way that you approach Him, things come back to you that you might not have had before. He had to fulfill the role of Samuel somehow. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
That's his decision.
Yeah. And then,
That's what I don't know. He could have done anything he wanted.
Yeah.
He chose through her sorrow and her faithfulness to fulfill Samuel through
Yeah. Yeah, let's get your application. Do you have application on there?
The only thing I have down here is he will do his work.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you'll find, especially in the Old Testament, early on in the books, it'll sort of be harder a little bit because there's so much that's not said yet. You don't know exactly why are all these things happening. Now, I mean, all of us may have read the book before, but it's kind of like. But then as you go through, some of the things are going to start surprising you because it's like, oh wait, hold on just a second, what's that? We just read this last week or yesterday or the day before. So it's the hardest part. I kind of sort of took the hardest chapter in relation to a harder setting to try and move along in relation to that. Anybody else? That's good. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Johnny?
This would have passed in the way we, in our old journaling. I'm not sure it fits exactly.
No, you're good. Yeah, that's good.
But I did verses 7 and 8. Observation was there's an ongoing problem. Two wives, one always provoked the other, and not only provoked her, but provoked her at the house of the Lord. Hannah wept and did not eat. Her husband noticed and asked why she wept, did not eat, and was sad. He assumed the fact that he was her husband should be enough to remedy any sadness she might have.
Okay, yeah.
The interpretation, background, polygamy was accepted. The importance of a male heir in that culture. Big picture, faith was rewarded, and husband was clueless to wife's needs. And here's your perfect example of why you have women and women separated groups, women in one and men in the other.
Mm-hmm.
The application being, I need to be attentive to my wife's needs. Being my wife is not her end all be all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to say that.
That's why we got separate groups. Because now she's like, do you remember? Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
This has nothing to do with what I wrote, but
Mm-hmm.
I never looked at it this way before, where it said she would not eat or drink. She was weeping, and I always thought she was too depressed to eat or drink. But now I'm wondering if she was fasting.
That's a good question. That's actually a really good question. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it's an observation with a question mark at the end. Could she have been fasting? But that's the beauty of bringing multiple minds together, because like probably very few in here was like even thought that. Could that be a possibility? Yeah.
Does your version at the beginning, it talks about Elkanah went up yearly to worship the Lord of hosts. Does yours say that, the Lord of hosts?
Yes. No. To sacrifice to the Lord of hosts. Yeah.
And go down a little further. It says that Hannah is praying to the Lord of hosts.
Mm,
At least in my.
yeah. What verse are you at? I saw the first part.
It's
But
verse
the-
11. She vowed a vow to the Lord of hosts.
Yeah.
Recognizing the
Yeah.
Spirit.
Yeah.
So we looked at what's specific about the Lord of hosts.
Mhm.
Because, and I cheated and went to my phone.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
God's sovereign control over every power, dominion, force, and realm. And so she was acknowledging that that's who he was, right? But she, in her grief, she really couldn't get to that point.
Yeah.
In her problem.
Yeah.
And then it takes Eli just to tell her. He never told her, yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
He said, may the Lord hear you.
Yeah.
And in that, she's able to accept that God has heard her prayer. Whether it's answered or not, he's heard her, right? To his point, he doesn't always give us what we want, but he's heard her, and she's at peace with that.
Yep.
And my application was, God,
Yeah.
here's a prayer.
Yeah. 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 You when you you know, it's just one chapter, but when you look at that chapter and then you look at all the multiple facets of that chapter and you look at when God's speaking to you as you're reading His Word and things are standing out, those are the things you just want to take note of. We don't think about this, but when God is from His Word pointing things out to you, that's God of the universe communicating personally to you. Stop and think about that. And is revealing and showing something of Himself to you that so oftentimes you may not either have ever seen before, or it's what in this moment you need. And then as Christians gives us the availability to share. What's our purpose? What's man's purpose on earth? To glorify God, which is if we're defining that as we were talking about earlier, find that's to show His greatness. He's shown something of Himself to you for you to be able to what? That's why there's so much pushback against this. There's so much, you can't do this, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it. It's not necessarily that Satan is out to make you look miserable. Satan does not desire for the greatness of God to be shown and seen by you and by others around you. And notice how everybody in here is like, I don't know if this is right, but everybody's in the same boat. That's why we're growing together in relation to that movement forward, right? And it's like brushing your teeth with your left hand. Through time and practice, it will become very natural, okay? But you have to give it time and practice, okay? And what you'll find is you'll hone in. You can just, if God leads you to just see 2 or 3 verses, and those 2 or 3 verses get pulled out, right? And you're just observing those 2 or 3 verses. It could be in a passage like this that you see her distress continually. What do you see in relation to Hannah? She is continually miserable, 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 grieved, oppressed, all those things, right? You may not know anything about necessarily the culture of what's behind and going on with all that. She's miserable, she's depressed, she's going through all this. Her husband approaches her, to Johnny's point. It's like when I read that, it's like, do you not have a clue? I mean, why are you so clearly, Johnny's reminder, clearly, he's not in touch with where she's at, right? I mean, what a reminder for us guys. Right? And it's like, get over it already, right? She partakes of the meal, but yet right after the meal, what is she doing? She goes there to the priest or the altar, and it's if Adam and Eve was reversed, right? If it was reversed, and then it's what Eve should have done. Gone to God, right? If it's like, it's a great passage like for ladies. It's like, what happens when your husband's not necessarily in tune? I mean, he's in tune, but he's not in tune, right? And he's, in essence, he's pointing, actually what he's doing is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because what's he doing? In essence, what's he doing with his wife when he says what he says? Verse 8. Yeah, he says, "Why do you eat? Why do you weep? Why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad?" Right? Well, duh.
In his own way, he's trying to come.
Yeah, but it's to your point. It's in his way, is what he's doing. And then what does he say? Am I not better to you than? What is that? There's like marriage strife here, right? Haven't I been enough for you to get over? And the reality for him, we don't know because it's not really the point of the point. But the reality for him is that he may have been doing everything in his possibility and power, obviously because he loved her, to let her know that she was totally loved in relation to that. But what couldn't she get over? Yeah. He was doing everything he could to show. But what couldn't he? What wasn't he giving her? Yeah. Well, in essence, the child wasn't happening, but he couldn't give it to her. Didn't have that problem per se with the other wife.
Well, he wasn't protecting her either from those that provoked.
You sure would think that. You sure would think that. How can you? It's not just provoked, but continually provoked, right? It's not a one-time deal, one-time pattern, right?
I look at it like you can't just say, hey, look at all the stuff. I just gave you a double portion. What's your problem?
Yeah. So here's where culturally it helps, right? Culturally it helps. So they're going to make a peace offering. Okay, what's a peace offering? Anybody have any ideas? You don't give a peace offering so that you become at peace with God. You give a peace offering because you're at peace with God. Okay? And a peace offering is given, and it's meant then to be shared. So you're going, it's like a thanksgiving offering. God, you have richly blessed us, right? And you call your friends, you call your family, and you share that then offering. Well, what's he doing with her? He's just pouring it on her, right, for that. Why is he doing that? She's barren and beaten up, right? But she can't get over that. I mean, she can't get over that. So he's doing everything he can do, but what can't he do? What can't her husband do? He can't give her the child. Because there's only one person who can give her the child, and that's who? God. And the text said twice what? Did you see it? Who did? The Lord closed her womb. Right? So you got this. So as we will, by the time we get here, we'll have already covered all of Abraham and all of that story. So we're going to be drawing on that well. Boy, that sure sounds a whole lot like with what went on with Abraham.
It just had to transpire like this because of the fact that God needed to replace Eli because his sons were unable to do it.
Yes.
And so therefore, if he hadn't closed her womb, if he hadn't closed her womb, she would have gone ahead and just had the children just like other ladies would, and she would have never made the vow to give that child to God.
Yeah. So what happens there is when you know what's coming next, right, then you can kind of put some pieces in place, Well, knowing Eli and knowing Eli's sons and knowing what's going to happen, right, I can see how this fits in. But then as we're reading it, what do we got to be careful that we make sure we do? Act as if that hasn't happened yet. So in order to not, and you're not, I'm not saying that you are, it's because you're not. Did I say he's not? He's not. Because what she's going through right here is she doesn't know what's going to happen next or why God's doing what he is doing.
You know what kind of surprised me about this whole thing? The fact that he didn't know about the vow. It was never mentioned in here that Elkanah knew about the vow, and he would know it. He could have overruled it, or what we studied in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But nowhere in here does it say anything about
Yeah. 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 So you have her going through that, or you have him and them religiously going to offer the sacrifices because they recognize they're at peace with God. He points her to the provision of God, right? Am I not enough for you? Am I not, all of that which God has given, is it not enough? And she knows then what? Because what does she do? What does she do after he says that to her? Yeah, but before, what does she do? Verse 7, she would provoke her, she wept, and she would not eat. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Then Hannah arose and what? Yeah. So I intellectually know that I've been blessed by God. I intellectually know that I am at peace with God. I intellectually know that God has provided for me enormously. But I don't have a child. I don't have a child. And when she presents herself to the priest, what's the term that continually comes up? Did you catch it? I think David brought it up. When she's talking to the priest, what's the thing that continually comes up? What's the word? She's greatly distressed. She prays to the Lord. She made a vow. O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction. Look at it. What does it say? Of maidservant, and remember me, and do not forget. Did she forget who she was? But will the Lord give your... 3 times she says it in one sentence prayer. Yeah. She has just this massive struggle before God, because in that culture, what do we know about women? What do they recognize as the value that they have to give to the family name? To children, and she can't. So in that culture, she would say, what do I really have to offer? What do I really have to offer? Right? Eli is about as discerning as me. You drunk, woman? Mike, you want to say something? Ross, were you going to say something to me? Eli's about, that discerning. And yet, whenever she says to Eli, what she says to Eli, then how does she leave? She's now at peace. What does that say about what she believes about the priesthood? That'd be a question that I'd have. Right? Because then later on, right now, we feel like, well, yeah, that should be, the priesthood should be offering that up. So now when the priest says it, then it's likened unto what? If a priest says it, then it's likened unto what? That God says it. So what does that mean about Hannah in her relationship with God? She trusts God then. She says, okay, that's enough. That's enough. So you could do a marriage seminar on this chapter if you wanted to, because what happens when you never want, as far as you ladies, you want your identity to have to come through your husband, or your identity to come through even you witness from God and others as what brings value into the situation, and you struggle with, there's a continual struggle of value. How am I actually bringing value to the equation? Am I actually bringing value to the equation, right?
So what gave the priest here the confidence or the authority to say this?
Yeah, that's a good question. What gave the priest the confidence or authority to say, thus saith the Lord? Yeah. I don't know. other than he's got that authority. So she recognizes his office, and it seems as though he does as well. But that's the part of the drama of the story, because he looks like a very faithful priest. He looks like a very faithful priest. So God has given him certain granted blessing rights. We would liken it unto God's given a father certain blessing rights in relation towards his sons, right? He's given, it's sort of like positions of responsibility, and with that responsibility comes the authority that comes with that office. And she recognizes that office. So when that office has told her that she will, she holds that that's been a promise that's been given to her by God. She says, okay. Goes home, conceives to bear a son. Right? And then there's this whole sacrifice thing that we could get into as well. But so you hear that and you're like, man, all that's kind of a good starting point. But then what do we find out about? We're quickly going to find out about Israel and Israel's priests, Eli's sons. They're wicked. They're wicked. I mean, they are like doing things that they should be killed for. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. Right? That's gonna come into play because then later on, when you kind of go through that, you're going to walk through that. But then later on, okay, fast forward it because it's about what God's doing with his people in Israel. Fast forward it, then all of a sudden the Israel's going to want a king, and what's their excuse for it? Remember what their excuse is about it? Well, no, that's not their excuse. That's what God says. That's what God says. God says this is why they want a king, Samuel. It's not what they say. Why did they say? Do you remember? Your sons are wicked. Why is that the wrong answer? I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but why is one of the reasons that that's the wrong answer? Because in their history, what have they seen? Whose sons were wicked? Whose sons here are going to be wicked? Samuel's sons are going to be wicked, but whose sons here are wicked? We're going to find out here in chapter 2 that Eli's sons are wicked. What did God do? He provided them another to lead them. So saying that your sons are wicked are not an excuse to say that God can't work through this process. Why? Because he's already done it once. That's Samuel, that's not their problem. Don't get slighted by it. Don't get slighted by it. They're rejecting me, not you. Right? Yeah. So, as you're studying it, it may be that you're taking a couple of verses. It may be that, maidservant stands out. Look at this, boom, 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 boom. And you've got verse 2 and verse 4 and verse 6 where you see this commonality. It could be that you see this spot where it says, the Lord closed her womb. The Lord closed her womb, And you see that providential sovereignty notation here. It could be, you're marking those verses, right? And then you're observing them, moving it to interpretation, and then from interpretation. So what does that mean about me? Right? So God's in the process of moving Israel. Big picture chapter. God's in the process of moving Israel into a transitional state. You find a woman who is here who is in deep distress because God has not provided her a child. And the Lord's closed her womb. Her husband, in consoling her, which wasn't much help, she recognized the goodness of God, yet still is in pain because of the pain that she is in. Presents herself to the priest, and the priest who holds the office gives her a promise, and she holds that promise is good. She trusts in the promise of God. God provides her a child that she then is willing to now give up. Right? So, application for me, in the plan of God, is pain going to be involved oftentimes? Does that mean you're outside the plan of God? Does that mean you necessarily did something wrong? His plan's greater than our plan, right? In the midst of that pain, can we recognize His provision? We can. But does that always get rid of the pain? Even intellectually knowing God's provision still leaves you to wrestle with the pain, right? But when we take that pain to God and we trust the promise that He's given in relation to that pain, can we trust Him? 1,000%. 1,000%. Okay? So here's what I want to do this week. I appreciate you guys hanging in. Y'all are doing great. Recognize everybody struggles with the process. It's a learned process. This week, 4 days, you choose the days. Ruth, 4 chapters of Ruth. Chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? Just do one chapter any given day that you choose that's best for you. Time, place, you choose. And then do the process of observation, interpretation, and application. Okay? If your observation runs a little bit long into interpretation, that's okay, but keep it to 1 page, because otherwise you'll be there all night. Okay? This doesn't have to be something that takes you 4 hours to do. Okay? I don't want, because what happens, here's what happens. It feels really good at first because it's like, man, did all this, and I just loved it. I loved it. But there's going to be times in which it's going to be a struggle for you to get a set-aside time of an hour to try and pull that together. So you need to be comfortable with, within a half an hour, 45 minutes, being able to very comfortably come up with that. Don't feel like you got to spend all night on it, okay? Observation, interpretation, application, and then bring it back with you this next week, okay? I'm not requiring you in a large group to have to share what you wrote down. I want you to have that privacy, okay? And then next week we're going to take 20 minutes maybe. I hope not more than that. And we'll just discuss that process. Okay? I want to make sure that anybody's got questions or struggles or whatever, that all of us hear each other's struggles with that. Okay? And then I want to try and close out with our definitions. So we'll walk through, most of the next week we'll spend walking through those definitions to try and finish that out. Okay? If you have your cards, leave me your cards, okay, just because I sort of want to start getting a rough idea of our groups, okay? And then if we can sort of get a little bit of a handle on what we think maybe that we've got, we'll try and break that up, okay? It's okay if you're still a little bit on the fence. It sort of lets me know. Right now, I don't know if we've got, 5 or if we've got, 15, okay? So that's going to make a big difference in terms of how we break up our groups. And I still know that Jeff and Vicki are going to both be a part. They're out of town tonight, and Kaylee and Josiah are as well. So we know we've got those 4 coming in as well. Okay. Questions or comments about anything? Yeah, Mike.
Are you going to break people up into groups?
Yeah, I'll break them up. Yeah. So if there's somebody that you're like, I'm not going with this person, just go. Yeah, I'll try and break them up. Yeah, what we'll do, but see, here's the thing. Yeah. It affects my yes, no, or maybe. So yeah, there's been good questions about that. If there's like folks you feel comfortable with, let me know that, because I'm not trying, especially this first go around, I'm not trying to like make whatever. But the reason I want those timestamps on there is because, like, for some people, they're really flexible, but for others, like what works for you, Mike, may not work for, well, not my, I was going to say my dad, but somebody else, Dale, okay? Because his schedule and your schedule just are not going to align. So there's no sense in me trying to pair you guys up in those groups if we already know that there's just absolutely no way those times are going to align. For most of us, we got some flexibility with that, but that's why for the time date thing, as far as that goes as well. But what's going to happen with that is when those groups get kind of broken up, okay, that doesn't mean that we still can't maybe mesh that a little bit if we have to, because their time doesn't work and one in this group works in this group and one in this group works in there that they need to switch. We can kind of work through that, but we got to have a starting point to get from 20 to 4 groups of 5 or 4 or whatever, the math, 5 groups of 4, depending upon all that. Okay. All right. I'm going to close this in prayer. Father, grateful for this day, the time that you've given us, and the time that each one of these folks have taken away from their evening, and just to be able to come together to not just share in Bible study, but Father, also just sharing each other's lives. Father, I just pray that you'll grow this in relation to each one of us, and just as a church unit, and the fellowship that we can have, living life together, encouraging one another through the process, and growing in your word as well, becoming better equipped to handle your word. I pray, Father, that no one here may be intimidated by it. I pray, Father, that no one here may feel like they're incapable in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Although, Father, with that, I pray that we give that to you, because as your servant Paul said, when we're weak, then we're actually strong, because now we're trusting in you through the process. So, but may we do that well together. And so I just pray for this week, and even as we study and just sort of look and reflect on what you did with Ruth and that whole process, I just pray, Father, that you will open up our hearts and minds as you meet with us during that time of ourselves, to reveal who you are in a greater way than maybe we wouldn't have seen before. These things we pray in your Son's holy name. Amen.